My name is Damian Patino. I work for the Office of Special Education at the New Jersey Department of Education in the area of professional development. And this is our last webinar as year 3. So this brings to a close 3 years of training. And we're going to continue the important discussion of least restrictive environment, and we're going to also get into a little bit about the daily challenges. Part of this webinar is going to be to self-reflect at the district level, to self-reflect on the work you've done in the last few years. Your work with LRE and your work on addressing inclusion may have started before this 3-year work that the Department of Ed has put out there. So feel free to share that as we go through today's webinar with some of our activities. These are some of our objectives for today. Again, we're going to go over the definition of least restrictive environment. We're going to talk about general ed program options for students with disabilities as provided in code. We're going to review LRE decision-making process briefly. So some of this may have been viewed in some prior workshops, especially from year 1 and year 2 of the training. And then we're going to give you some tools to help you plan and build your programs for students in Gen Ed as well. Okay. We've all seen, or if you've attended any of our LRE workshops in the last 3 years, you've seen this theory of action. So I want to kind of divide this theory of action into 2 sections. As a state, we really are focused here on the left-hand column, which is if New Jersey Department of Ed provides training and technical assistance over this 3-year span, then our goal hopefully is to result in an increased percentage of students with IEPs benefiting from inclusion, from being in general education settings to a greater extent when possible. Okay. The 2 middle columns I want to just discuss because that really talks about the work that you've been doing in your schools. And I want to celebrate some of the work that you've been doing in your schools. And I hope that as we go through the webinar, some of you share the initiatives or the progress that you've made in the last 3 years, because from doing these workshops and traveling all over the state in the last 3 years, I've really seen some amazing work, and that work has been feeding my work in being able to share that progress with some other districts that may feel a little stuck or a little bit challenged in trying to address the inclusion, the percentage of inclusion of students with disabilities in their districts. So I really am looking forward today, and I hope we can have some robust discussion as far as, I know it's limited to this little chat window, but I think we can get some good information out there. Okay, this next slide is something you've all seen as well. So just a quick review. What we did in year 1 was we rolled out trainings on preschool inclusion. We rolled out trainings on respectful, responsive classroom. We discussed effective instructional strategies such as co-teaching, and we also talked about school-wide systems of support through PBSIS. In year 2, we took the feedback forms that you gave us in year 1 and we expanded upon those topics. We had IEP decision-making part 2 that focused on the Oberti questions, which we'll talk about a little bit later. We introduced New Jersey tiered system of support, which is expanding and continuing to be a focus of the Department of Education moving into the future. We're also going to talk about that a little bit this morning. And we also focused on some practical application of some of the theory that we discussed in year 1. Respectful, responsive classroom, what does that look like? What are some tools you could use to help address class climate, class management? We also talked about IEP development. How do you actually put this into place? Looking at goals and objectives, et cetera. In year 3, we shifted and some mixed reviews in year 3 to the shift. But what we were really worried about with the shift was the idea that you're not going to be mandated to interact with us past this year. Hopefully you reach out to me. Hopefully you reach out to our offices, and we're able to help match you up with professional development experiences that are useful to your staff. And I hope we continue this relationship. There's over 76 districts, and I hope we continue moving forward. But what we wanted to do was give you tools to sustain what you started to do, to look at what you did, what you're doing through a different lens that can help you support the work in a more effective manner and make sure you're doing what you set out to do, rather than getting sidetracked, or and you're giving your programs and your initiatives time to breathe, to develop, and to really grow properly. So that was our focus in year 3, was all about implementation science. Monitoring and technical assistance from our monitors has gone on throughout this settlement agreement all 3 years, and that is also wrapped up as well, or is wrapping up for some of you. Okay. So if those of you who've used GoToWebinar in the past, you're familiar with our setup here. There is a menu item. If you look down, there's webcam, audio, dashboard, attendees, polls, questions. Go all the way down just above chat, and you'll see handouts. There are 3 handouts that we provided for you today that you can download. One is an article from the beginning of this training series that was in New Jersey, I believe it's New Jersey Bar Association, put out this handout. Put out this article, and it discussed what we're doing to try to move towards inclusion. It's good background information. It's also good in sharing some statistics that even before we started putting these trainings out, that New Jersey was moving more towards increasing the percentage of students with disabilities in inclusive settings. You've heard this probably over and over again for the last 3 years, but as a quick reminder, when this lawsuit started almost 10 years ago, we were looking at we were 48th out of 50 states in including students with disabilities. So what we're looking to do is really build upon successes from the last 2 to 3 years, and I'd like to hear from you as we go through today. Also, what are you doing moving forward, and how can we sustain this push towards working with students with disabilities? Good article, short article. I think it's a 2-pager that we supplied to you. It's found under handout 1. I just clicked on handout 1. It just kind of does a download here. We have a black and white copy. Feel free to read through it just as some background information in looking forward. So, we're kind of looking to wrap things up today, but also do a quick, where are we now? Where are we moving towards? Okay, so I've done a lot of talking in the last 10 minutes. Obviously, I want to kind of put it back on you. If you are alone in a room, at home, or wherever you're listening from, I have no idea of knowing. I know we have 146 people out there somewhere. You can put your own thoughts in the chat window if you'd like. If you're working with a group, like let's say you're listening to this with a couple of administrators, a couple of staff members, you're in a room together, I ask that you kind of nominate somebody to be a chat spokesperson and put it in the chat. What I'd like to hear from you right now is a quick reflection on what is different now than it was in 2014 when we began this conversation and we started doing needs assessments and coming out to your school districts. What has changed with regard to personnel or people, engagement with families, engagement with the community? What has changed in terms of programs that you provide for students with disabilities that promote inclusion? And what has changed with policies in your districts regarding students with disabilities? So I'll give you a few minutes, probably 3, 4, maybe even 5 minutes, and I'll be quiet a little bit. I just want you to reflect on this, and please use the chat window. As I mentioned, you click on that little triangle, expands, you'll see Gene Kelly's 2 postings there. Just type in to that blank space underneath some ideas and thoughts so that I could just share them out with colleagues. You don't necessarily have to identify yourselves or your districts, et cetera, but just take an opportunity to talk about that. People, programs, policies. Go for it. Some districts put together a well-defined tiered system of support. Some folks responded, robust engagement and discussions with principals and other stakeholders regarding LRE. That's the kind of work we really were looking for. We were looking for you, not to spend too much time on this discussion, but we really were, I'm happy to see that, the engagement of stakeholders was a key piece of a lot of the district work that's out there. Looks like some folks are, some participants are not getting a separate window for chat. It just says questions in chat. So what I'll do, I'm glad you're getting your stuff to me. I'm sorry I can't share it out with everybody because it looks like the questions are accumulating on my end. The chat will go out to the entire audience if you use that chat window. So I'll use the question window right now. And like I said, what I'll do is kind of summarize some of your responses. I have tons of responses right now, so I'm just kind of scanning them and sharing them. And please keep it up. Don't be discouraged by the technology issues we're having because it's really great information for me to share with everybody. I think a couple of key themes that I'm seeing here. First of all is pinpointing the issue, the LRE settlement agreement, whether it was before we started the trainings or not, the fact that your districts are really looking at LRE and pinpointing that as a focus is really a key. You can't solve a problem unless you identify it as a problem, and then it becomes a focus and a sort of a coordinated focus across district personnel. So that's one theme that I'm seeing across the board. Even better is if you're specifically addressing inclusion through a certain program. So whether it's training your co-teachers, increasing your in-class resource programs, focusing on preschool, focusing on kindergarten, focusing on early childhood education, whatever those foci might be, I think it's key that it becomes focused and directed, whatever your efforts are. I see power of two training. So identifying relevant trainings here also is important rather than just throwing together some one-off trainings, coordinated efforts in training. That's another theme that I'm seeing across a lot of these postings. Let's see. And then also that last piece, which I already mentioned, which I just kind of want to summarize before we move up. Is that cross-pollination of information, having child study team and special ed teachers talk to gen ed teachers, having meetings with principals or administrators who may not have focused in their experiences as educators or administrators may not have focused on least restrictive environment. So now they're getting an education on this and an awareness of this to help them coordinate their efforts as well. So collaboration across staff. If you have child study team who are very familiar with LRE and you have in-class resource teachers who really know what LRE is about, but gen ed is resistant, there needs to be those discussions, and they're sometimes difficult discussions, but that cross sharing and pollination of information is key. So thank you. This is excellent. Obviously the sharing across the screen is not working out for whatever reason. I hope, can you still see my PowerPoint screen? I just want to make sure of that. Yes, all right, excellent. Thank you folks for responding. Good. All right, so getting back to the next sort of phase of our presentation. This is just an example from New Jersey Coalition of Inclusive Education of a 7th grade student, Gloria Park, who won a poster contest. It's called Inclusion Works is the title of her poster. Kind of a neat poster. I'm just going to intersperse these, not going to spend a lot of time on it. But just hearing or just seeing like what a 7th grade student's impression of inclusion is kind of neat. You have students with diverse backgrounds, a student with a disability in a wheelchair, you have students with a jump rope, and the jump rope spells out inclusion. Pretty neat. Obviously I'm not trained in art interpretation here, but a really cool interpretation of inclusion from a 7th grade student. Just a little sidebar to kind of break up the monotony of the presentation today for you. These next few slides, the next 5 slides or so, are slides that are going to be very familiar for you, but it is an emphasis because it comes from New Jersey Code. So I just want to share these slides one more time with you as we part ways, because these are important. This is important information. This is New Jersey Code. It's important information to share with your staff, whether gen ed or special education. Okay, obviously the definition of LRE, which we've gone over for the last 3 years, is to the maximum extent appropriate student with a disability is educated with non-disabled peers. So some keywords highlighted there. Maximum extent appropriate is one that I like to emphasize. That is where we get a lot of debate and discussion. Well, how do we solve those debates and discussion? we solve them as a team, as an IEP team. You know, a special ed teacher, a gen ed teacher, a child study team member, a parent, the student, an administrator. We all might have different ideas of what the maximum extent appropriate looks like. So it's important that those IEP meetings where we're determining placement have a robust discussion with consideration as to where the student is placed. Another thing to remember too is we're looking at, you know, programs and support rather than just looking at placement. I think traditionally in New Jersey, we've talked about this for the last 3 years. Traditionally in New Jersey, we're very much looking at, hey, this student is eligible. They can get special education and they're eligible for specialized services. So they need to go in a special ed classroom. We look at immediately special ed as a placement. Well, it's not a placement, it's an array of supports. So I think that's a key piece that we need to take away from the last 3 years. And I'll be honest, I'm not, I'm pretty confident that everyone attending the workshops in the last 3 years has walked away with that impression if they didn't have that impression to begin with. You know, I think we've drilled that one home. This next one too these are 2 slides coming up that I really have emphasized over and over again in my trainings as background, right? Removal from the general education classroom occurs only when the nature or severity of the disability is such that education in the gen ed class with the use of supplemental aids and services cannot be achieved satisfactorily, okay? So in New Jersey, we're going to go over it one last time in a few moments here, people will ask, well, how do we know, you know, what's appropriate? How do we know? There's a 3-pronged test, which we're going to get to. The rationale for removal in the IEP, which was a 3-pronged test established by the Oberti decision, okay, back in 1993, okay, that is what we use to determine whether or not a student is being placed in the least restrictive environment. Okay, so that's a key piece of this too that we're going to get to momentarily. The other key part of this, and again, this comes from feedback that I've received, you know, whether it's as a consultant or as a child study team member or even a special ed teacher. There are often times we'll get a gen ed teacher or somebody saying, well, I don't do that in my classroom. Okay, I don't provide study guides. I don't provide you know, I don't help them make flashcards, or we don't have time to do this or that. You know, that is, if they need that stuff, they need to go down the hall. They need to go to a separate class. They need to go to a special ed class. You know, that is something that we're trying to break as well. The expanding the horizons. Yes, there are limits to, you know, some of what you can provide in a gen ed classroom. I get that. However, we really need to explore our options before we start making decisions and sending students out. And the big take-home message of this slide is just needing support does not equal removal. Okay, that is a key piece of it. A student needing support does not mean they're not in gen ed anymore. It means let's see if that support, let's examine the needed support and see if that's something that we can provide in that classroom before we make the decision regarding placement. Okay. Let's see. Sorry about that. Just a little lag time on the PowerPoint. It takes a second or so to load when I switch, so I just want to make sure the bar fills up there as far as the technical piece. Okay, so we're looking, when we talk about addressing the disability, we're looking at adapting content, sometimes the teaching approach or strategy, sometimes the methodology or delivery or delivery of instruction to address the needs of the child. What that really translates to this is from federal law, IDEA, what that translates to in New Jersey code is the idea of specialized instruction. Okay, specialized instruction to the student with disability, and that might include modifications to strategies, you know, modifications and accommodations. You know, sometimes a student needs extra time. Sometimes they need a study guide. Sometimes they need support with reading questions, or, you know, they need questions read aloud to them, et cetera. Those types of things can be provided in a gen ed environment, and very often we sometimes glaze over those and go straight to a special ed placement. So yeah, so this is all again quoted from New Jersey code. I just want to kind of emphasize this one last time. Okay, so again, I've talked a lot, so I'm going to give you an opportunity Let me see. Okay, really quick, I'm going to check in on the questions bar in the chat room. So, oh, thank you. Somebody said this is great feedback, hearing this and getting ideas about what other districts are doing. So that's great to hear. Thank you for that. Another participant, will we be able to print a hard copy of this PowerPoint for future reference? I'm going to ask Jean very quickly. This PowerPoint, all our PowerPoints for LRE have eventually been approved for public dissemination. It just takes a little bit of time. So I am guessing that oh, that's an interesting question. Sorry. I'm guessing that this is no exception. So I'm gonna wait and see if Jean, if you have a chance, just chat with me and just let me know, confirm that the PowerPoint can be distributed in the future. I don't think we can share it with you today necessarily, but a lot of these PowerPoints eventually make it to our website, as they did in year 1 and year 2. So I think that's going to be the same case. Okay, yes, Jean's response too, because Jean's on the administrative side of this as well. Year 3 webinar will be available online along with year 1 and year 2 webinars. You can go to New Jersey Department of Education. If you go to our special education section, legal protections and responsibilities, and then there's a section there for least restrictive environment. And there's a section, a subheading there. There's a lot of subheadings on our website. I'm just going to say that. LRE lawsuit implementation. And if you go there, typically it'll be a week or 2 after the webinar, and it'll be posted online. Thank you, Jean, for helping me. No, and don't apologize for posting it twice, Jean. That was very helpful. So thank you very much. If you're having a rough time downloading the handouts, I just saw that. I'm going to give you my email after this. Feel free to email me and I can share the handouts with you. Somebody asked if they can take a look at those posters. I think I have, I'll have to take a look. I think I have some of those posters scanned in a PDF on my personal computer here, my computer here with the state. So if you want to also email me, I'll give you my email info at the end, and feel free to email me and I can share that with you as well. Because I do have a few. I don't have all of them, but I think as you see through the presentation, we have, I think, poster winners going back 3-4 years or so. Okay. All right. So let's recharge for a moment. So hang on, let me see here. I'm just checking the time and making sure we're on pace here. All right. So, you know what? I'm sorry, guys. I'm going to make an executive decision. I'm going to kind of skip over this. Okay, sorry. Technical instructions. Jean just shared with me that. Okay, she mentioned it in the chat room, so all can see. If you're trying to open the PDF, put the cursor down towards the bottom. The icon to save will be highlighted, and then you can save it to your computer. Thank you, Jean. Thank you very much. All right, so very quickly, if you want to respond into the window, what part of the special ed law regarding LRE stands out for you? So look at these 3 phrases: specially designed instructions, only when those modifications and accommodations don't get the job done, or the need for modifications. Like, which ones of those really hits you or challenges you the most? So, okay, sorry, I'm going back and forth here. Leave this, look at the last 5 slides. I'll go back for you, okay? Think of this special ed law, think about the code, and just post in the comment section, or I'm sorry, the question section. Just post like what stands out to you. Is it, not solely based on needed modifications? Is it only when the use of supplemental aids and services cannot meet the student's needs? What stands out for you with LRE? Maybe it was something different than what you started out with a few years back. So, take a couple minutes, post in there, get a break from my voice, and just let me know kind of what stands out for you regarding the LRE definition and LRE in the code. Okay, I'm looking, and anyone want to share out just impressions? What I can rephrase the question as well. in this manner, what you shared some of the changes that you made, right? So now, where did you maybe focus, and what was an area that you really needed to increase knowledge around? Was it increasing knowledge around modifications? Was, or accommodations? Was it increasing knowledge around strategies in the gen ed classroom? Or was it increasing basic knowledge that a student with a disability, their default setting is gen ed unless it's shown to be inappropriate? So just take a couple minutes, and I'm not going to read these out with your names and such, but I'm just curious to see what some of your responses are. Thank you, guys. It was getting very quiet. I got nervous. I thought 43 minutes in, we lost everybody. So I'm glad you're still out there. All right. So yes, one person shared the specially designed instruction phrase ties well with the concepts of UDL that were also taught, and that has a widespread application. Excellent. Increasing knowledge of our staff, both in modifications and differentiation of instruction, or differentiated instruction. Excellent. We've worked on building additional supports in gen ed and focusing on the only when provision. Okay, excellent. So yes, when this is not working, then we look at alternative placements. We look at additional supports, etc. Excellent. Excellent. Training staff on using specially designed instruction in order for students to be successful. Yes, I think a common theme wrapping up this 3-year project, a common theme I saw was, some of us know that this student, a gen ed teacher knows that this student gets these accommodations and modifications in the IEP, but very often they're afraid to ask, well, how do I do this? How do I actually do this in the classroom? And I think that's something that we, at least hearing your response, or reading your responses, I should say, some of you have really started to address. How do we actually make this happen? Like, okay, great. So he gets all these accommodations and modifications, or she gets this and that in my gen ed classroom, but how do I actually do that and do that effectively? And I think that's a great point that some of you are raising with this. Another person raises the only when idea. Okay, often the necessary supports and interventions are able to be administered in gen ed, but the teacher does not have the skill set to do this. Yeah, that's exactly what some of your colleagues are saying as well. We have been working hard to train all teachers on supporting special ed students, resulting in gen ed teachers providing more supports than they did in the past. That's excellent to hear, and I agree that. And your colleagues agree with that statement as well. I'm getting a bunch of responses along those lines. Changing the mindset that students must have accommodations or modifications to succeed. There has been concerted efforts to implement these accommodations and modifications consistently in the IEP. Excellent, excellent. Again, guys, great participation. I'm really excited that I get nervous when there's a minute or two of dead air and nobody's responding, but all of a sudden the question room questions just light up. So keep it coming as we go through. Excellent. So yeah, so it looks like all three of these sort of phrases on the board, but a lot of you were really looking at those three areas, really looking at applying, like implementing modifications, putting that out there, and then also really trying things before. If you're familiar with our tiered system of support, that's really where we're headed as a department as well, is looking at what, before a student even gets referred to special ed, what was tried, what was attempted, what data do we have on classroom interventions before that referral is made. Okay, we're going to talk now a little bit about the array of supports in gen ed. This is another grand prize winner, grade 7. The title of this poster was Inclusive Schools, Inclusive Lives. Also looks like healthy eating up there, a representation of some food that I should probably work into my own diet at some point. So good stuff. Good, excellent poster there. Okay, so we're going to briefly go through the array of supports that we typically rely on, and we're going to talk about some of the issues we might run into feel free if you want to sort of share even in the chat or in the question box as I'm talking through these, some challenges that you may have in actually putting these supports into place. So the first one I want to highlight is the idea that we can modify curriculum and we could modify instructional strategies, okay, that we can do in a gen ed environment. That can be challenging, and I think one big question that comes up a lot is how do we know to what extent we can do that in gen ed? And I think the big piece of it, if you really go to looking at the Oberti questions, you do want to take a look at, can we sustain this support in gen ed, and is it something where the student with the disability is making progress towards the goals and objectives and then in their IEP. And then you're also looking, as if you look at the three-prong approach of the Oberti decision, you're also looking at impact on other students in the classroom. That is a piece of the LRE decision-making process, a piece of it. So we'll get to that later as well. Behavioral supports, okay? You can create behavior plans that can be very simple to very complicated and individualized, depending on the level and the need of the student in that classroom. You do not, just because a student needs a behavior plan does not necessarily mean that they need to go to a special education classroom. I will, as someone who's done a lot of behavioral work, say that it is very important that whoever is implementing that behavior plan, whether it's a gen ed teacher, special ed teacher, or a paraprofessional, needs to have the support and the training and the follow-up training and sort of supervision to make sure that it's implemented appropriately. I've had plenty of opportunities to implement behavior plans. I've given them to teachers and they've just sat on a desk because the teacher doesn't know what to do or how to do it, or they come back to me 3 days later and go, this didn't work. And I think those follow-up conversations and that follow-up support is key. It's great that you have somebody doing a behavioral assessment and writing a plan, but then who's supporting the implementation of that plan? And that comes back to, sustained implementation. Assistive technology. I was just discussing with a colleague this morning, right before I got online with you folks, really looking at our approach as a state to assistive technology, because I think some of us, and I'll include myself in that discussion, will sometimes overlook there's a lot of great assistive technology over there, and because out there, and because we're not familiar with it, we may overlook opportunities to include technology that might impact a student's ability to be in gen ed. So I think that's another key consideration. The teacher aides, I think a lot of districts will rely on teacher aides for support, and that's great. They do amazing work, but making sure they're supported, I think, is a key piece. Same thing with consultation services. Are the consultation services provided to teachers to help support the students enough to meet the teacher's needs, or the paraprofessional or teacher aides needs as well? Integrated therapies, are they focused? Are they also addressing the need for generalization in the gen ed classroom? Okay. And then in-class resource programs and supplementary instruction. So we have this array of supports. And when we look at considerations that lead us towards this sort of idea of aligning to the New Jersey student learning standards and progress towards the often challenging expectations of the student learning standards that some of our students with disabilities may struggle with, we really look at considering the factor of the classroom learning environment, and that sounds like where a lot of your efforts have focused. And I commend you for focusing your efforts on that classroom learning environment. What does our gen ed classroom look like? And does it help build capacity to serve students with disabilities? The second piece is curriculum. I haven't heard too many administrators really discuss curriculum. And for me, I'm not necessarily a professional expert on curriculum. So I haven't had those discussions, which is a little bit out of my area of expertise to talk curriculum. But I will say this, it's an area to explore. We have the student learning standards that are mandated by the state. However, as districts, you can adopt a curriculum that aligns with those standards that may be more friendly to differentiation, might be more friendly to give teachers options on how to present the material, how to assess the material, and still cover the same standards and still address the same standards. Okay, and obviously, we need to look at the individual student needs first and foremost. If the student is eligible for special ed and specialized services, they have an IEP. The I in IEP stands for individualized, obviously. So we do need to address the individual student needs first and foremost. Okay. This is a quote from McSheehan and Jorgensen. I just thought was interesting. Okay. It's the least dangerous assumption to presume that with the right instruction and supports, all students are competent to learn the gen ed curriculum. The best place to learn is in the gen ed classroom and other inclusive activities environments in which there's a natural proportion of students with and without disabilities. If we really think about it, preparing a student with a disability to live post school, post-education, when they leave us in the public school system, okay, it's an inclusive world. It's a world where not everyone. So the better we can do to help students prepare for that inclusive world, we're better off. And the more we can do also to support or to educate the gen ed students on the diversity of our classrooms and the needs of different learners, the better off we are in this inclusive world as well. Okay, hopefully by now, we're a couple years in to NJTSS. Hopefully by now you've seen this tiered system support. Okay, we try to, what this really looks to do is to organize supports and services into 3 tiers. A key piece of understanding of this tiered system, okay, is that this is aside from special education. I know that sounds a little strange. Everyone seems to think, or a lot of people when they're first introduced to this triangle think, okay, well, tier 3 is special ed. No, the idea is to look at what you're offering. The first step, I should say, is to look at what you're offering in terms of supports to all students, gen ed and special ed, and then organizing them into tiers. Okay, so the first tier or level 1 is looking at the curriculum that's being used, the instructional practices in gen ed that are being used, planning for learning variability, making sure we're capturing the diverse needs of learners in our classroom. If we're doing that well, if we're really consistent in our tier 1 instruction, which is what all of our students are receiving, then 80% of our students are going to be making progress, passing their classes, getting decent grades, et cetera. They're going to be moving along, right? They're going to be doing well. Okay, about 15% of our students may need more. That's where we get our tier 2 supports. That might be supplemental interventions in English language arts, math, maybe behavior, maybe small groups for social skills, maybe groups for addressing behavioral needs, etc. Someone just asked, are you saying that tier 1 equals good core instruction? Yes, I am absolutely saying that. Good core instruction across all of your classrooms. That's what tier 1 is. That's what everyone is receiving. And according to research, again, it's not a hard and fast number, that 80%. But what we look to do, what we strive for, is that good core instruction is meeting the needs of 80% of our students. 15% may need more, right? More targeted and sustained interventions, okay? More supports. And then tier 3 is when we get those really intensive supports. That might be 5% of students, okay? So an example that I can give you, because behavior is my background, is with positive behavior supports. You could have general system, clear expectations across your building, an incentive program for students to demonstrate the expectations that are clear across all classroom settings, across common areas like the cafeteria, the gym, et cetera. You can have all of that, and most of your students are going to behave appropriately and not get referred for disciplinary reasons. You may have a couple students popping up on your radar here and there that would benefit from maybe a check-in, check-out system. It's not an individualized behavior plan, necessarily, but it might be something that they carry from class to class where teachers are able to document how well the student is doing behaviorally in that classroom, a check in, check out. Okay. And then you may need a student who we have to get down to the function of the behavior. What is causing this behavior? Little more data driven, little more driven by, really 100% driven by function. What is the purpose of this behavior? All behavior serves a purpose. What is the purpose? And then matching our individualized intervention to that. So just a quick anecdote. When I used to work with, certain school districts, and I would go in and there would be a teacher that would say, "Oh, you're here to see Johnny. Well, I've got 5 other students in this classroom that you could work with because, Johnny's a behavioral issue, but I have 5 more behavioral issues in the classroom." That doesn't mean I need 6 tier 3 plans. Because you know what that tells me is we have to back it up to that teacher's core instruction. Maybe we may have to back it up to tier 1 and look at what that teacher's doing to maybe address all the student needs. And maybe if the teacher's game for it, we come up with some sort of class-wide behavior strategy that might help out those other 5 students as well as Johnny. So anyway, that's just a quick sort of microcosm example or a small classroom example of that. Okay. So the reason I bring up tiered system of support, before I move on, the reason I bring up tiered system of support is the idea that, I think we have lived in a world where it's very gen ed, special ed. Okay. It's very much like, okay, gen ed, we do core instruction. And if they're not doing well with core instruction, then they go to special ed. And what tiered system of support really looks at, and believe it or not, we're a little behind a curve on tiered system of support because there's been many states that have adopted a multi-tiered system of support, and so we're excited and we're really engaged in tiered system of support, and many districts are doing it, but it's a new concept for a lot of districts as well. And the idea is, what are we providing our gen ed students? Because not all students who struggle are special education students. And then if a student is not eligible and there's not after evaluation, they're not identified as eligible or having a disability, what can they access for support? A lot of times students will struggle. And the second part of that, which I'll say, and I'll move on, I'm sorry, is just this idea that if a student's not eligible and they don't get any services, there's nothing built in, there's no tiered system of support. Okay, that puts pressure also on your child study team because then they start to feel like, well, you know what, maybe we don't reevaluate the student, maybe we keep the student eligible under a category that doesn't necessarily apply anymore, but at least they're getting services. And that's not, it's not fair to the student, it's not fair to some of the other teachers out there as well, where we're keeping students kind of under a classification or a need that or under an umbrella of services that they may not need all of, but we're doing it as a safety net when they may not need it. So just a little side note from experience and feedback that districts have given us as well. So tiered system of support is a direction that's really emphasized on where we're going. So the next few slides you may have seen if you ever went to LRE Decision Making Part 2 that I've facilitated, but I'm just going to sort of glaze over this. There's going to be an emphasis on this and research, but I don't want to spend time reading everything to you. But I think the key piece that you'll see is that we have decades worth of research that is showing that gen ed is beneficial for students with disabilities, whether it's math, whether it's reading and writing, whether it's performance on standardized tests, whether it's progress towards their IEP goals. And then the one that I think most people identify with is it's definitely impactful on their behavior and their social skills. They're in a classroom full of students who theoretically are acting and providing appropriate social and behavioral models. Whereas if they go to a classroom full of students that all have behavioral issues or social issues, they're lacking those appropriate models. Okay, so we see it across many domains. I want to broaden your horizons a little bit beyond the impact of positive behavior, but also on academics. The other piece of research, there was a lot of research, especially mid 90s to late 90s that we have quoted here, where there's the positive impact of a small class environment on student with disabilities fails to demonstrate its effectiveness across different research. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. Sometimes, and again, we can speculate all day about why that is. Some participants in workshops have said things like, "Well, I've seen classrooms that may have lower expectations because, or may be challenged by the fact that the diverse needs of those students in the small class environment are so diverse that it's very difficult for them to differentiate and to make those changes." And I get all of that, but I can only speak to the research. I can only speak to the research, and the research says that this has not been demonstrated to be an effective environment for all students with disabilities. There may be students that is a better environment for them. I'm not ruling it out. Okay. But again, this decision is made on an individual student basis. I can't say that enough. Okay. Another bit of research. Again, students with severe or multiple disabilities perform better with numerous and spontaneous opportunities to interact with peers. Okay, so they may not. Some students with intellectual disabilities that were fully included made more progress in literacy skills than when they were placed in specialized schools. Pretty powerful. That was from 2012. Okay. So we're going to talk a little about best practices with regard to inclusion. So we see that inclusion has its merits, has its benefits. Okay. But we also kind of make some assumptions in that. And what that assumption is that this gen ed program is staffed with competent teachers that are fluent in differentiated instruction, fluent in learning strategies, making modifications, and providing accommodations to students. So that's a big assumption. But I just want to get there by saying, this research shows the benefit, but it also shows the benefit of competence. Okay, and these are competent classrooms where we see these changes. We see the potential for inclusion in this research. The other piece is authentic membership of the classroom. So the students with disabilities in that classroom are authentic parts of that classroom community and that classroom, membership. They're not just there they're physically there, but they're sitting at a table in the back of the room, or they're off to the side, or they're clearly identified as a student who's different. Okay, so that's another piece of it too, is authentic membership of that classroom. The other piece is full participation. So yes, there may be times when the student needs individual instruction, or be pulled aside for supplemental instruction, or removed for specialists like speech or physical therapy or occupational therapy. Yes, that may happen. But the idea of that student being able to participate in all the activities that their peers are participating in is also a best practice characteristic of such an inclusion classroom or program. The reciprocal social relationships, again, that kind of relates to that full participation piece. Okay, when they are engaged with friends, with classmates, we can set up situations for those students to interact, but very often when the natural interaction occurs with some coaching, with some role modeling, that's where we see some amazing and fruitful reciprocal social relationships. I worked in a district many years back where they had an inclusive summer program. It was not really ESY per se. It was more of an inclusive social skills program with peer mentors. And it was amazing by the end of the summer to see some of these students getting invitations to pool parties from gen ed students and being included with those friendships and relationships. And it happened with coaching and with students being put in appropriate social situations, but it happened organically from student to student. It was not forced upon them. And that's pretty amazing when you see that happen. And the last piece is holding the students with disabilities to high standards as well, and not just lowering the bar and saying, okay, well, they can't learn this, so we give up on it. Well, if they, and that's where a big piece, and we could spend a whole day talking about alignment to gen ed curriculum, but that's where that whole piece of our federal mandate that we need to align goals and objectives in the IEP, align again, keyword align to the gen ed curriculum for the age group for the grade in which the student is enrolled. Okay, so learning to those high standards, never losing sight of what age students of the same age of the same grade are learning, and trying to prevent that gap from just continuing to widen. And I've told stories like that. If you've ever been in the training room with me, I've told stories about seeing that in action, where we continue to say, all right, well, he's on a second grade reading level. Let's give him second grade, and we don't weed through the curriculum, and they stay in second grade for years instead of really carving out and prioritizing curriculum. Pieces of the curriculum to help them get access. All right. Let me just do a quick time check-in. Looks like we're at the 11 o'clock mark. We're getting to another little activity, so I apologize for a lot of the chat. If you do have questions, I will say feel free to some good comments in the question bar. Feel free, and I will pause to answer your questions, like I did earlier about the Tier 1 interventions. Okay, one district shared that they have an RTI process that is helpful in addressing student needs, and they also utilize differentiation of instruction and some personalized learning to meet the individual needs of students. I'm going to follow up question to that person actually that posted that, and just ask, when you say personalized learning, are you really utilizing technology for that? Is that an individual computer-based interface? Is that staffed with personnel, or is that something that you're using technology for? Just a question on my own follow up to that. So if you could answer that, that would be great. Another posting: in our school, we actually created a career-based instruction program for our population of students that add in hands-on training, job opportunities, college readiness skills, life skill readiness that meets the needs of this, I just lost it there for a second, of this small group population. So you identified a group of students whose needs might be addressed in a different way, right? And that real focus was on transition. And I commend you for doing that, because that's a tremendous need throughout the state is transition. And it's a focus moving forward as well. If you look at things like the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act, WIOA, we're really collaborating and looking to collaborate with Department of Labor on a lot of those things. Another post: we're moving towards individualized and differentiated programs for all students through programs such as iReady for reading and math, Reading Eggs, Read 180 Systems 44, and Moby Max. Thank you for some of those specifics, and I think that might be helpful for some of your colleagues too, to see what types of programs you're moving towards in your district. We're making progress on developing behavior intervention plans. All right, right up my alley. Developing behavior intervention plans in gen ed classes, which are specifically designed. Happy to hear that as a behavior guy, school psychologist myself. Excellent. We've implemented Wilson, Just Words, Foundations. Additionally, I'm laughing because I mentioned foundations a lot in implementation science as something you could look for in certain classrooms. Additionally, we're using computer-based learning programs to track progress, aid teachers in delivering individualized instruction. Yeah, it's excellent. I mean, we're not trying to take away the job of a teacher here, and what we're trying to do is really help the teacher be more effective in their work and have it a little more focused and data-driven, right? That's what we're really looking to do with some of this technology integration. Oh, thank you for the follow-up. We're using a variety of technology to personalize learning. So my question about personalized learning, they're implementing special subject enrichment as well to personalize instruction in non-academic areas. Excellent, excellent, excellent. I believe we are addressing The instruction and that students need by working in tandem with the gen ed teachers. We have an RTI program within our school, but we also have special education basic skills and ESL. So modification of instruction to meet student needs is the norm. That's excellent. And that's really attacking it with, or I keep saying attacking, it's such an aggressive word. I apologize, guys. But what I mean is addressing it through the gen ed side. And you have other programs, but you're really looking to expand that capacity, that ability of the gen ed classroom to serve those students with specialized needs. Not just special ed students, but students who need RTI support, support through an RTI program who may not be identified yet or identified as having a disability, basic skills, and ESL. Excellent. Student career portfolios between grades 4 and 8. Very nice to hear. We often look at careers as a focus when you hit middle school. You know, the IEP mandates that we look at career and transition at 14. That does not mean you can't start exploring those areas and getting those students better prepared to have those conversations at 14 at younger grades. So if I understand this posting correctly, excellent work. I'm really happy to hear that. Many of our students with intellectual disabilities at high school have a shared time, work, and vocational program. Okay, so that is that's excellent to hear as well. Like a specialized program for a group of students whose needs have to be addressed differently. Achieve 3000 as a differentiated reading tool along with Project Read. A personalized learning period has been created in the master schedule of all elementary schools. Very interesting. Something that's from personal experience, new to me. I haven't heard of that, so that's impressive. And through this work, the last 3 years, I've really been interested and intrigued by the work that some administrators have done around master scheduling. I just want to commend some of those administrators out there, you know who you are, who have done some really creative work with master scheduling to address their individualized needs, whether it's making sure your co-teachers get more common planning time, whether it's incorporating this personalized learning period, which is really neat. Really starting with master scheduling and building from the ground up is really neat. Question here, how do you provide support for ELL students with IEPs? Very good question. ELL is not one of my areas of expertise, so I'm not going to maybe get into as specific an answer as you might like, but I would encourage you to follow up with me through email at the end of this webinar and reach out to me, and I can put you in touch with some folks here at DOE who are ELL experts with regard to the IEP. I will speak to this as a school psychologist. A big challenge that I've seen, which has gotten much, much better in districts across the state, is making sure you're teasing out where there is a language discrepancy versus a disability. And I think that's very important, that you have the proper testing, the right team who specializes in testing students who are English language learners to be able to make that determination, because you don't want a student being categorized or classified or labeled as having a learning disability when really it's just a language barrier and they're going to catch up. I've seen students at the high school level who come in with very, very limited English and within 2 years are fluent and they're in honors classes and they're doing wonderfully. But I could only imagine if that student was improperly categoriized or misunderstood as having a disability, where the student may have, their track may have been very different. So I'd be happy to follow up with you if you send me an email, which I'll give you my email at the end of this, and I can put you in touch with some ELL resources. Thank you. Excellent question. I'll just read off a few more. We've got, some specific interventions people are listing that they worked with: Project Read, Orton Gillingham, Touch Math, strategic interventions in special ed and gen ed when needed to help modify the curriculum. A robust INRS process is the second part of that posting. I can't agree more. Early days of INRS, when I was in a district, it was just like, hey, we're going to monitor. We're going to see what happens. We're going to keep an eye on this kid. And it wasn't really full of robust interventions or information gathering. And I think that's what INRS really needs to focus on, is just making sure that you're actually trying something and you're actually getting information on that. Let's see, and we have another one, another district saying Read 180 System 44 Dreambox within Gen Ed programs. This allows students for more personalized learning, allow them to work with a modified curriculum, have the opportunity to be part of the Gen Ed setting. Excellent. All right, great discussion, guys. I mean, I hope it's not, the time is not wasted on you hearing what some of your colleagues are doing. And I apologize, it's in my voice because you're listening to a lot of my voice today. But I will say it's wonderful, and it's an opportunity for us to kind of take stock of what we've been doing, celebrate that a little bit, but also we're going to start heading into territory now where we start talking about where do we go from here. So we're also going to talk about that before we depart today, before we part ways with our final webinar. Okay, another poster here from 2015. Inclusive Schools, Inclusive Minds poster competition. Inclusion Matters is the title of this one. 9th grader from Watchung Hills. Excellent. All right, I'm just going to pause for a moment, get a little water. All right. When it comes to the IEP process, this has been a very, 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 very popular training that I still get requests for even after the LRA settlement, and I get, I get requests for this training, you know, from non-LRE districts all the time as well, to the point where I think we need to expand this and maybe, you know, turn this IEP decision making into maybe a webinar or something that people can access on a regular basis, because I think, you know, a lot of us learn how to write IEPs as a child study team member. We learn you know, on the fly, on the job. It's on the job training. We learn from supervisors, and one district might vary from another, which is okay to a degree, but we also want to make sure we're doing best practice and also following the code. So we're just going to talk a little bit about IEP decision making with LRE in mind. Just someone else chiming in really quick. I just want to read it just to share, because this is another specialized population that I know a lot of you out there may be working with, and that is students with severe anxiety or depression, and may not come to school, right? And as a result, they're not attending school. So, you know, some people use the terminology, I'm, you know, school phobic. Like there's another, Christopher Carney is a researcher out there, has published a couple of books on this. He calls it school refusal because it's not always anxiety based, but it is often lumped into that category. So there's a partnership with another agency, okay, and that partnership has helped them train the staff, work with the students, work with the families to handle their needs and get them back into school. That's awesome to hear, and thank you for sharing that story as well. Very, very good. All right. Just getting back to the IEP, okay? Remember, please, that special education is array. I would actually change the slide. It's an array of services. It's not a place. Special education is not a destination. It's not a place. It's not a placement. It is an array of services to support a student. Okay, the decisions are individualized. I'm going to give you the framework for some of those individual decisions in a moment. It's based on the individual student's needs. And you want to look at the impact of that student's disability on their participation and progress in that general education curriculum. And the decisions are made across, you know, from subject to subject area. You may have a student who's very, you know, especially you're working with students who might be very strong in math and science, but not strong in reading and writing, or vice versa. Okay, you know, you want to consider every subject area across the board. You also might have students with behavioral needs who, in a structured learning environment, in a classroom environment that has excellent core instruction and great classroom management, those students may thrive. But you put them on in a gym class, in the cafeteria, in an area that may be give them a little more wiggle room, that you may see more behavioral issues. So supporting them across those settings is also key as well. Even though, you know, I'm not saying that, you know, cafeteria is not a subject area, but it's a consideration as far as when you're looking to support behavior. I just wanted to clarify that. Okay, so key concepts, okay. Where a student is educated, placement in the gen ed classroom, you know, placement out of district, placement wherever, okay. Those placement considerations happen after discussions from the IEP, around that IEP table. So when I say that IEP table, we're talking about child study team case manager. If there's evaluations done, whoever did those evaluations is usually sitting at that table. We're talking about a gen ed teacher and a special ed teacher. Okay, we're talking about parents. We're talking about the student. We very often, the way we sometimes incorporate students into our IEP meetings needs work sometimes. You know, sometimes we have a student come in and say, hey, this is what we're doing. Oh, okay. Are you okay with that? Yeah, this is fine. And that's the extent of the discussion. You know, we really need students to, you know, be good self-advocates, understand, become self-aware of their strengths, their needs, and advocate for themselves, especially as they get older. Okay. So yeah, placement considerations occur after the discussions at the IEP meeting, okay, across the various stakeholders at an IEP meeting. And then the gen ed classroom is, I think I use this in my trainings, the default setting, okay? That is the first placement option considered, okay? Now, again, if a student has been placed out of district, let's say for 3 years, et cetera, every year you have to, at an out of district placement or in a very restrictive environment, either you want to consider like, okay, are we doing enough for inclusion for this student, whether it's through activities, et cetera, and where can that student access the gen ed classroom wherever possible. So that's the first placement option considered. You want to consider gen ed first, and decisions are made, obviously, including parents, okay? Now I'm going to go back to 1993. If you haven't seen these couple of slides, very important background information, because not only does it impact how we educate students with disabilities in New Jersey as a landmark decision, but it also influenced heavily IDEA in 1997. I'm going to highlight those words that are bold, that says inclusion is a right, not a privilege for a select few. Inclusion is a right, not a privilege for a select few. That is right from the language in this ruling, okay? So it's not that you earn your way into that setting. It's whether or not the student, okay, can be educated to the maximum extent appropriate in the least restrictive environment, in the gen ed classroom to the maximum extent appropriate. That's where we get this language, is from this particular hearing. Okay, so a little background on Oberti. I don't know if you've heard that story before. I'm not trying to say anything about age or the years, but in 1993, I was not following special education court decisions. I'll just say that. So I have heard the sort of oral history of this and read about this secondhand. So if you know the story a little differently than me, that's you know, I apologize, but I'll just kind of give you the Cliff Notes version. We're talking about Raphael Oberti, who is a student with Down syndrome who was removed from a gen ed classroom in their school district, placed in a segregated special education class. And, you know, the parents had concerns. Why couldn't the supports that this student was receiving in a specialized program meet that student's need in a gen ed program? Why can't we provide some of the supports that we get in these specialized programs in a gen ed classroom? And the district said, no, we can't. The courts, obviously, through the Oberti decision, disagreed with that. Okay, and this is the three-pronged test that we get out of the Oberti decision. Okay, May 1993, you'll see 3 prongs. Okay, whether the student can be educated in a gen ed classroom with supplementary aids and services. So what that means is, as an IEP team, if you're saying the student cannot be in this gen ed classroom, okay, well, what did you consider? And what did you discuss? And what did you try or attempt in that classroom? And what we look for, and when we're looking at an IEP, is specifics. You don't just say, oh, we talked about a variety of things. Okay, variety of supports, variety of supplemental aids. No, what did you actually discuss? And was it relevant to the student's disability and needs? Okay, what was discussed at that table? And then what was the rationale for why that wouldn't work, or why that hasn't worked? Or do you have data to support that it hasn't worked? So that's one consideration when it comes to these factors. Now, must you try everything that you consider in the gen ed classroom? I will say no, you don't, but it has to be discussed as part of this rationale for removal. When you're talking placement, you should be discussing what specific supplemental aids and services, what specifically can we do in gen ed to support that student, and whether or not it's appropriate. Okay, the second prong, a comparison of benefits between gen ed and special ed. And then the third one we'll get to in a moment, the potentially beneficial or harmful effects in a place on which a placement in gen ed can have on the student with disability, with a disability, or other students in the class. So I'm going to break them down just very quickly. Okay, you want to identify specific, and I can't say that enough, specific supplementary aids and services, and then why they're not appropriate in the gen ed classroom. That's for question 1, and this is part of that rationale for removal. Okay. The second part of the rationale for removal is very straightforward. What are the benefits of gen ed versus what are the benefits of the special ed class? You're weighing benefits of both. That's benefits of both. Okay, that's a clear one. This one's a little more complicated. You want to look at the potentially beneficial or harmful effects that placement in gen ed may have on this student with the disability, or the beneficial or harmful effects that placement of the student with a disability may have on the other students in the class. So this one is kind of a 4-part question that you have to answer or address one of those 4 parts. Is there a harmful effect on this student with a disability? Is there a harmful effect on the other students in the class? Is there a beneficial versus beneficial? So you really want to just choose one of those areas and address it. Okay. I can give you specific examples as a follow-up, maybe offline. But yeah, that's a tricky question. But that's where sometimes, I've dealt with students that have very, very severe behavioral needs, and that's where sometimes the rationale for removal really becomes relevant, where the students in the class are impacted by that behavior in a very significant way with loss of instructional time. So, all right, again, lots of talking. I am going to turn it over to you guys for a moment. Just talk and post in the question section about, just comment on your IEP meetings. What have you been working on with regard to improving your IEP process? Was it something that you looked at in the last few years? Are parents heard at those IEP meetings? Are they given a forum to express their concerns and needs? Are you able to show progress? Are you able to report progress to parents and to students to show where they started and where they're heading and where they've gone? And then, are the programs clearly defined as options? What are the supports available? Are they out there for discussion at that meeting? So just take a couple minutes, comment on your IEP meetings, how they've been going, and what kind of changes or observations you've made in the last few years. And I'm missing a question mark on here. If you want to critique my editing, I missed a question mark, so I'm going to try to make that change as well while you're doing that. Give you a minute or so, and then I see some postings already coming in. I'm going to answer a couple of questions real quickly. Hold on. Let me just arrange my windows here a little bit. Okay, you should, hold on. You should see the turn and talk. So if there's any issues with that, let me know. All right, so a couple more questions trickling in about availability of the PowerPoint. I'm just gonna give you a quick heads up. What we're looking, eventually the year 3 webinar will be available on our website. If you go to the special education page, and then the subheading is legal protections and responsibilities. Under legal protections and responsibilities, you'll see least restrictive environment, LRE lawsuit, implementation. So what I'm going to do, actually, I'm going to see if I can put that information. What I'm going to do is take this information and I'm going to put it on a final PowerPoint slide at the end. And that way you'll have my contact information, and then you'll have the information on where to get where to get the PowerPoint, if that will be helpful. All right, so just give me a few minutes. I see some more responses coming in. I'm just gonna let them build up a little bit, and then we'll run through them as we plug ahead. Let me see what we have here. I'll get to that at the end. If you want to jot that down now, this is my email address, phone number, and then there's some information on where you can access the webinar. I'll leave that up momentarily if you want to take a look. Okay, somebody is also asking me to show the Oberti slide again. I will be going back to that. Okay, some districts said that they looked at the continuum of the programs available, focusing on least restrictive environment, revisiting some placements to make sure that they're correctly placing students, and then moving up students in the continuum as progress is made. Yeah, I mean, sometimes those are difficult conversations. If a student's doing well in a self-contained environment or in a resource environment, and you're talking about moving and taking that next step, that leap into Gen Ed, sometimes those are difficult conversations to have. But I do like this idea, monthly meetings to discuss student placements. That is pretty neat, not something I hear about too often. Can I give examples of quality answers for the rationale for removal in the IEP? I always get that. I know I'm hesitant to give you answers, but what I can give you, if you want to email me, is a checklist. I can give you a checklist that we use in our training sessions that kind of goes through considerations for each one of those LRE questions. And we also give you considerations for that transition from separate settings. So I can share that resource with you if you want to email me. That's not a problem. But I just hesitate to do examples of wording, especially in a recorded environment like this, just because people will then the idea of an IEP is some variability and variety, and I think sometimes people will be like, hey, the guy from the state said this, and we're going to copy everything he just said and do it over and over again. And there's going to be 76 districts out there with my wording, and that's not a good practice, not a good practice to have. But I can definitely give you a checklist. That's for the person who asked that question. I can share a checklist with you. I think it may even be on the website, but I'll check. Just email me, and I'll either give you a copy of the file or I'll give you a link to where it is on the website. That's not a problem at all. So yeah, I love that comment about looking at the continuum of services and then looking, not getting stale or stagnant with it, like not just saying that continuum of services that continuum of services is sufficient, but also that the student's stuck. Like once they're in a placement, they're in a placement, and if they're doing well, they stay there, and not continuing to kind of challenge and look for least restrictive placement. Excellent. Someone asked if I could show the Oberti slide again. I put it up just to show it briefly, but again, you'll be able to get these hopefully within the next 2 weeks. You'll be able to get copies of this PowerPoint posted on the website, and I'll give you that info as well. I think this is a slide you wanted. If it's not, let me know. I can post it briefly, but I gotta kind of keep moving on. I gotta thank you. So I guess that's the one you were looking for. Excellent. Thank you. All right, let's just look at 2 more responses. We created a template for the present levels of academic achievement functional performance. Awesome. It helps aid teachers in including data gathered by benchmarks and authentic assessments appropriate for students. The inclusion of this data has really allowed us to demonstrate growth in IEP meetings with parents. Ooh, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. I love to hear that. And then also posting of that, the data comes from, I think this is also part of that posting. I'm sorry, I read them out of order. But integrating data into the PLAF is huge, and that's a great, I'm hoping that's a takeaway from one of our trainings, because that's something we emphasized in the present levels. The data can be teacher-based assessment. It can be some informal data, but how are you going to measure progress if you don't have baseline data heading into that IEP and heading into that year? So we have more data at our fingertips with computerized assessments. How are you integrating that data and using it and really getting, PLAFs that capture the student needs and their strengths and needs, as opposed to, and I use that word strengths, very strongly, want to look at what can the student do? How are we going to use their skills to address their needs? So excellent. And we're working with our teachers to find best ways to show growth across different special populations. Okay, so yeah, so you may be looking at, let's say, an autism classroom or a different group of students that have needs. With autism, if you follow that area of education, there has been a long time emphasis on the need to collect data towards progress. Okay, just getting little leery of the time. I just want to make sure we wrap up in a timely manner and get your needs met. But I did post, and I'm hoping it's up there. I did post a poll. Okay, if you click on it on the dashboard, it'll say things like webcam, audio. It'll say webcam, it'll say audio, it'll say dashboard. It'll give you the number of attendees. It'll say polls up there too. There's just one poll I put up there on your own time. We don't have to necessarily discuss it right now. If we have time at the end, I'll come back to it, but it's just kind of an interesting poll, something I wanted to discuss. How do you feel your decision-making process is going at your school? Is it strongly supported by our practices? Somebody replied in the question box. That's fine too. Is it respected, but we can really do more to promote a better climate? Or is it not in place? We really need to work on that decision-making process. Is it pretty straightforward and predetermined? Okay. Hold on one second. I cannot reach. Okay. All right. So we'll come back to that poll toward the end. All right. What we're going to talk about now is building and enhancing program options. This poster was done at Beck Middle School in Cherry Hill. Today's conversation really asks us to bring together all the components that we've built through the last few years, and we want to consider individual students in this equation as we've been charged to do through the LRE and IEP process. There's a daily conversation heard in every district on any given day. Okay, today's discussion is going to also talk about the idea that we're looking at high expectations for our students, and we're in the business of high expectations, but also meeting the student halfway and meeting their needs. Okay, we are going to talk a little bit about the idea of inclusion and looking at our inclusive practices. This is just an area to sort of look at, or self-assess. What does our inclusion look like? Are we including by integration, segregation, or is it just exclusion altogether? So, it's kind of interesting. I've gone into co-taught classrooms. I've gone into in-class support rooms, and it's very clear that this idea, that diagram of integration is what's occurring rather than inclusion. Now, sometimes you walk into a classroom, that's a strategy. Okay, it is to have students, but if that's the only strategy you're using in an inclusive room, it's something that you should be examining. Okay, I'm going to briefly spend time on this, and then we're going to move along because I'm getting, getting conscious of the time as well. We have a handout here for quality indicators. This is handout number 2. If you look at, there's 3 handouts posted. First one was the article, and the second one is this one, quality indicators for inclusion. So what's the point of this handout? Like, why are we giving you this? Well, this handout highlights the areas of climate, learner variability, tiered supports, specialized instruction, and policies. Okay, and this handout allows you to utilize checklists and find where you might find evidence of these indicators. These are quality indicators for inclusive practices. Okay, so it's a way for you to self-assess and look through the areas that you've addressed through the last few years and the areas that you still need to address. A little bit of a quality indicator kind of needs assessment. Okay, so I encourage you to get to handout number 2. Okay, I'm just seeing a post here. Technical issue. Don't see the poll features. If you're having issues with the poll, I'm gonna don't necessarily worry about it. You can just, all you have to do is just check off one of those 3 boxes in the poll area. It'll say the decision-making process at my school as the drop down. Let's see, and then and I'm not gonna. We'll share it later. Okay. Polls should be, yeah, there, it's going fine. All right, good. All right, we're gonna move it along. So, district planning, we had a really, we had a nice year this past year, really emphasizing the idea of implementation science. Many of you have seen this slide before, but the idea of coming up with a district plan, but including all 5 domains of implementation science, looking at, are we choosing the right intervention? How are we implementing this intervention? Are we rolling it out over time in stages? Is our district ready for it? Are our staff ready for it? Do they have the training they need? Do we have a team to aid in implementation? How are we problem solving? What values are we using when we problem solve? Okay, what are, who are our key personnel? And then, what are our goals? What are we looking to address through this process? Okay. So for the sake of time, I'm going to hold off on this. We're in this trade-off of either giving you more opportunities to participate and post, or giving, hearing my voice more. So I apologize. But in this particular situation, I just want to encourage you to really look at, this 5 frameworks and reviewing, how are we assessing our needs, right? And what are the gaps in the data that we have? Where are we not seeing student progress, and are we looking at the data correctly? Are we looking and analyzing the data well? Okay, so at the expense of not going through a complete review of implementation science, I will encourage everybody to look at those trainings when they are posted online. They're posted online. Make sure you look at those trainings and utilize a lot of the resources that we provided you with this year. Okay. One of those resources is your 3rd handout for today. It is district capacity assessment. Those of you who came to the implementation science trainings received a hard copy of this. If not, this is your opportunity to get a PDF version of it. I can't emphasize enough or encourage you enough to utilize this as a way to take a look at where you are in implementing your program, whether it's your co-teaching program, whether whatever you're launching or addressing in your district. Utilize that district capacity assessment to see, have we covered our bases as we move through this process, and are there reasons why we may skip some steps? Okay. Okay. All right, that was not what I was looking to do. All right, I'm trying to just very quickly share with you the poll results. Okay, so the poll results are being showed there. 63% of respondents said that their process is strongly supported by practice. Okay, that I'm just going to go back to the poll for a moment. The decision-making process, their IEP process, is strongly supported by practices. That is reassuring to hear. That is nice for us as the DOE to see that. And 37% respected, but we can do more to promote. And that's fine. We all have work to do, obviously, and including us here at the Department of Ed. So no problems. But it's nice to hear that progress has been made in a majority of the districts participating today. Okay, district capacity assessment. I'm just moving on to the first step, okay? What are you going to do now? What is the first thing on your list? It's August. School is right around the corner. Some districts are back in action already. Okay, what is the first thing on your list to do with regard to inclusion, with regard to least restrictive environment? You know, keep me hopeful that this work will continue beyond this settlement agreement. So please share in your, in the polling area. I'm sorry, in the question area or the comments chat area. Please share your next steps. What's the first thing on your list to do? With regards to inclusive practices. Whew. All right, so yeah, let's just we're starting to wrap up our discussions for today. So I just wanted to kind of hear from you. What is your next step? What's the first thing on your list to do moving forward? Curriculum. Okay, I see some feedback up here. Reviewing our curriculum. Oh, that's very nice of you. Somebody's saying thank you. Anyone else? What are you doing now? Where do you go from here? So we have curriculum. Okay, reviewing IEPs to ensure that we are aware of all student needs, right? I think what you've heard from some other districts that's been effective too is really looking at integrating data into the IEP process more, making sure that the IEP is sort of a consistent document throughout, right? Identifying best practices and trying to proliferate them through PD with all staff. Yeah, so yeah, I appreciate this comment because I think it's one thing for you to identify what best practices you want your teachers to use. It's another thing to get them on board and really get it to become part of their day-to-day lives. As we mentioned in implementation science, to fully implement, to get to a place where it's just how they operate on a day-to-day basis. Another district shared that they are focusing on co-teaching, reviewing lesson plans associated with co-teaching and observing those co-teaching classrooms. So a real focus on co-teaching. That's excellent. I think a lot of districts have found that they get good results with targeting the co-teaching model when it comes to their numbers of students that are included in Gen Ed. Any other review classroom programs and IEPs to ensure all is in compliance, and meet with teachers, especially those in co-teaching classrooms, to review student needs and teachers to discuss their roles, materials, and supports that they need. I love that you also highlighted the need for teacher support. What supports are you providing your teachers to help them through this process? It can be very anxiety provoking, changing their methodology, incorporating new strategies, trying new things for any of us can be very challenging. So I love that you mentioned that as well. Really looking at what do our teachers need to help us support them in addressing the needs of students with disabilities. Anyone else? Co-teaching is a marriage and sets the tone and climate for all students. Okay, excellent. I think that's a good commentary. I've made that joke on occasion in trainings that working with co-teachers sometimes can be like marriage counseling. Yes, because sometimes it's a relationship like a very intimate relationship when you're with somebody all day long, especially if you're with each other as a partnership for a full day. Excellent. Next steps: meet with CST to review any students that may be coming into our programs that are at the end. Hang on a second. of the CST evaluation process. Oh, so that's a next step. Like that's actually a very practical, like immediate next step, right? Getting together with your CST to look at students that are coming into the programs that are at the end of the evaluation process. So what does your year look like? What's your capacity looking like? What's you might have new students coming in. How are their needs being addressed? Yeah, excellent comment. Any others? So I am gonna wrap up our discussion. Feel free, I'm gonna be keeping the webinar open for a little while longer. Feel free to type in some questions, ask some questions. These resources, again, will be available on the PowerPoint, which will be posted within the next 2 weeks or so. I just want to share a couple pages of resources with you, walk them through with you. And then I'm going to stick around if you have questions at the end as well. Okay. And just kind of wrapping things up and see if you need anything. I've been really impressed, and the department has been impressed with the work that you've been doing in schools. And I can't encourage you enough to continue the work and the efforts that you've already started moving forward. So here's an article. Effectiveness of special education is placement the critical factor. Okay. Here is a website, Institute for Community Inclusion. This is a reference that we used as part of our presentation today. This is handout 1. That is New Jersey's Move Towards Inclusion. New Jersey Lawyer is the publication. National School Climate Center is another good resource. Educating minds and hearts because the 3 R's are not enough. Okay. National Early Childhood Technical Assistance Center, NECTAC. Okay. Our code, obviously, is a huge reference and resource for you all. Okay, T&D Network, the NJ, oh, there you go. Somebody had asked, I forgot that this was included there. Somebody asked for access to NJCIE posters, okay? And there you have a link right there. Sorry about that. I forgot that was included in the references, as it should be. So I'm going to leave the floor open for questions. And while we do questions, if you are logging off, if you're wrapping up, please feel free to take down my contact information, my email address and phone number. And there's also some general instructions on where to look for these presentations as they are posted. If you have not accessed the presentations that are already up, I would encourage you to do so. I do get requests very often for folks that are looking for slides, PowerPoints, and you can access those through our website. So I'm going to stick around for questions. You're welcome. I'm getting some thank yous. You guys are wonderful. I really was nervous there about the chat participation, and I was excited that the chat board and the question board really lit up. So you guys were wonderful and great audience, and continue to keep up the good work. Before I leave, Jean, I'll post. Let me just see if I can post. I'll post Jean's reminder. If you can't see the chat window, Jean just is reminding everybody to please submit the LRE Year 3 assurance statement to Jean Kelly at doe.nj.gov. Okay, just to wrap up, just to clarify also with the assurance statement, that was sent out to the LRE contact only in your district. So if you are not the LRE contact, you would not have received it. Now, all of the non-compliance districts received it, so staff doesn't have to worry about it. Typically, it's like the supervisor of special ed or a special ed director. Usually, it's somebody at the central office that receives that and is responsible for the assurance statement. All right. Thank you all. Gonna log off now. And Jean, thank you so much for your help. And look forward to an exciting school year moving forward. And I look forward to hearing about the continued work that you do with regard to least restrictive environment and inclusion in your districts. Thank you, everybody.